a great session led by our R&D leadership. So enough for me. Come on up. Let's get started.
Boy, if anybody should be in that group about things, say about RESO, it shouldn't. It's us. So good luck. No, thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to R&D. We've kind of got a split session, so we're going to try and get through R&D so we can really have a discussion about ULI. And the one thing I want to kind of stress is we're here to have a discussion. We're not here to present to you guys. We really need your feedback to be successful as the R&D group. We really, our job is to listen to you guys. So I'm Greg Moore. I'm the CTO at RMLS in Portland, Oregon. I've had the pleasure of meeting most of you, so there's not much to tell you about Greg. I've been in this business for 36 years, so my age shows, but it's been a great ride, and I look forward to continuing on. And John.
Hello, I'm John Bro. I'm Vice President of MLS for statewide MLS in Rhode Island. I have also actually been in the industry for 36 years. I don't look as old as Greg, but I look worse. I know, I'm kidding. So anyway, we're happy to be here. And like Greg said, we don't really want this to be a presentation. This is really an extension of our virtual work group where we really want it to be interactive and a little more intimate. So please, by all means, join in with your questions and commentary as we move along.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. So let's just get down to the business of the business, and that's the antitrust policy. RESO strives to increase competition in the marketplace and will not be a forum for anti-competitive conduct. The RESO antitrust policy governs the activities of RESO and its members, including this meeting. A link to the policy was emailed to you with the meeting agenda. Please consult RESO's counsel if you have any questions about the policy. So let's just jump in. So really, we just kind of put together, as you can see, kind of a light, loose agenda, because it really is supposed to be, a discussion with you guys. So one thing I always like to kind of start with is, what do we do as R&D for the RESO community? So really, as you can see, our purpose, and I don't have to read this thing to you, but is really to kind of be what we would call the top of the funnel, where business problems, challenges, and even improvements to the standard can come through us. We basically write a fairly formal business case, so and work it through our group, and then it kind of moves on normally to the more technical work groups for implementation. So you'll see in our agenda we kind of have that. We want to hear from you, kind of open mic discussion also, because that's where the good work sometimes of the standards building happens. I think when I started at RESO, they used to call it making the sausage or something strange like that, but it kind of makes sense. So for R&D, we really only have 2 active business cases that are in flight right now. The unique organizational identifier, and Mr. Sachs, Greg Sachs, will be kind of running through that. We have an OUID that we created, I hate to say it's probably 7 to 10 years ago. And we found it's kind of brittle. So, Greg's gone and done a great job of really kind of modernizing that and making it a much more extensible and maintainable product. And then we'll get into the discussion for the unique licensing identifier. And I think, there's been some chat on the stage about that. So we'll kind of explain it to you, and we'll be looking for your input as far as, how we as an industry can create, a unique licensing identifier. And the challenge there really is not everyone's a realtor. So, NERDS only takes us so far in that challenge. So, we want to make sure everybody who participates in a transaction, et cetera, has an identifier. And we'll talk about the different business cases that really affects. So we're going to hand over to Mr. Sachs for a little bit and let him go through and explain to you the new and improved OUID to UOI.
All right. Is this thing working?
It's working.
All right, very good. I don't know what these guys are talking about this open discussion, because I have a presentation to give you. So sit back and watch the ride, because I go through a lot of slides. You don't have to take pictures. You don't even have to really pay attention, because after this is all over and done, we'll put it on the RESO website. And so anything you see that is interesting to you, just you'll get it there. Or tap me. I'm around talking to people all the rest of the week. So my name is Greg Sachs. I've been in the industry for over 16 years now, which I can hardly believe. I've worked in local associations. I've worked in startup environments. So you got to be a vendor. And if you're going to be a vendor in this industry, you have to work with MLSs. So when there was an opportunity to become the steward of this cool identifier product where we name the industry, basically, all the business names in the industry, I jumped on it because as a vendor, I wish I'd had this. And it would have made my life so much easier to know how many MLSs there are, which associations are tied to those MLSs. That didn't really exist that well until very recently. So Greg mentioned the OUID. That has been around for a while now. It's a resource in the data dictionary called the OUID, the Organization Unique Identifier, not organizational. The way this was designed is each organization or each role of the organization gets a separate ID. So if you're an association / MLS, you have an A identifier number and an M for MLS identifier. And that's how it was designed. And it's created some confusion. So for marketing purposes, because we also have the ULI, which is the main event of this, the unique licensee identifier, and the universal property identifier, we changed it to the UOI. It just happens to coincide with a notion of creating one ID per organization, no longer this bifurcated association and MLS style thing. And that's what I've been working on with the R&D group and the people who wrote the business case and Sam to come up with. And we're presenting it to a wider audience finally. Inside the OUID are MLSs, associations, technology vendors, brokers, commercial, and the idea of a pooled platform, which is sort of a MLS that manages other MLSs. And we'll get into that in a little bit. To understand why we need an ID, you gotta know what's in a name and why this is such a problematic, like weirdly problematic thing we have in our industry. Joe Weissner, the data services manager from Constellation One, said to me, the industry tends to refer to the same MLS 7 different ways, causing system-wide confusion. The UOI provides a reliable common thread that can be deployed across our enterprise, saving us countless hours of oft-repeated tasks. I like to hear that. Because MLSs have a bit of an identity problem, kind of like Sean P. Diddy Combs. He changes his name every other year. Apparently he's called Love right now. In our industry, I'm gonna pick on Carl Demuse. He's a friend of mine, so I think it's okay. He's the MLS of record in the Cleveland area it was Yes MLS. It's now MLS Now. On their own website, they referred to themselves 7 different ways. I couldn't figure out what they were called to put them in the UOI. And then when they launched as MLS Now, they were in all caps. Yet when they were talking about themselves on the website, it was capital N, lowercase OW. Less important, but that kind of confusion spreads, and then you have issues. Like how many times do we refer to realtors? The NAR wants you to do all caps in the registered trademark. The industry does not do that. I think it's because they can't find the registered trademark on their keyboard. MLSs and associations, sometimes they're the same entity, but they have 2 different names. So Southwest MLS is the Greater Albuquerque Association of Realtors. They may incorporate differently as a nonprofit versus a for-profit, but the industry doesn't know. When people come to us looking for the certification for Greater Albuquerque, I'm like, well, that's Southwest MLS. We certify the MLS. So we started pushing them together, and we created a new RESO-specific field, our own local field, if you will. Acronyms are very important in our industry. You all know that. You may only call Midwest Real Estate Data MRED or California Regional CRMLS. Maris in the St. Louis market, they've gone full KFC. They're no longer called Mid-America Regional Info Systems to the world. There's a whole generation of people that won't know KFC is Kentucky Fried Chicken or that Maris is Mid-America Regional Info Systems. That's really important. Local associations are MLSs. Can you imagine coming into this industry and saying, okay, where do I get that MLS data? Oh, you get that from Northeast Mississippi Board of Realtors. What? An association? Yeah. And so we certify these entities as their association name. Super confusing. There are 4 West Central Association of Realtors across the country. How are you supposed to know what that is? Well, for our certification purposes, we add the state that they belong to. That's not their official name. That's not what it is out there. Oh, and not only that, That's 8 different ID numbers, 4 A numbers and 4 M numbers. State associations are also MLSs. Iowa and Texas, that's who we go to certify a certain set of small MLS entities in those states. They manage that. So now what, are they an S or are they an M, or what do we do with them? With one identifier, we don't have to worry. They just have multiple roles. The pooled versus independent concept. In Michigan, it's pretty pronounced. You've got MI Real Source and Real Comp are 2 MLSs that manage for a bunch of associations that decided to end their MLS, work and give it over. But MISHRIC, the Michigan Regional Information Center, the companies that they work with, the associations there, maintain their independent MLS status. Try figuring that out if you're getting into those markets. Because MISHRIC, they use FBS. So when we go to get a certification for MISHRIC, they get certified, and so do all those associations, as opposed to the other one where it's just 2 entities. And then there's a hybrid model. I know Rob's in the audience, Rome MLS. That is 4 local associations / MLSs that are going to still be able to be certified as their own MLS, but also as this new hybrid model until they decide to do something else. And we try to track that. Hopefully they tell us what's what. Clint Skukin, Senior Vice President of Organized Real Estate at T360 said, the UOI enables us to visualize the association and MLS landscape, which has been beneficial for helping our clients plan their futures. It allows us to demonstrate that nearly 60% of all realtor associations are served by a regional MLS, a fact that has helped us facilitate conversations about organizational strategy. Beyond the MLS and association conversation, technology companies are becoming brokers. So what we had called a T ID number is now a B ID number. Well, this is getting to be too much, so we had to come up with a new system. Beyond the name of a company, other things that are part of this UOI, which is essentially just a spreadsheet of information, is we display the full website name because there's value in having that little S there. We know it's a little more secure. We use USPS addressing standards because one good standards body should use the standards of another good standards body. We took the legal names off of things. A lot of y'all like to have LLC and Inc. at the end. We're going to capture that in a different field, just to keep the cleanliness of the way it looks on a list. And then, of course, we do proper branding. Other branding issues, NAR, if you go to realtor.org and look up the name of organizations, they just put everything in all caps. They're not even worried about all this extra detail. So that can be troubling. Or you wouldn't believe how many times a realtor, like the Realtor Association of the Sioux Empire versus the Realtors Association of Citrus County. That gets interchanged and mixed up and people lose track of who's what. Board and association. For a while, it was trendy to become an association of realtors. Back in the day, they were all boards of realtors. And then now you just nix it all together. And now you got Columbus Realtors, Minneapolis Realtors, Georgia Realtors, Texas Realtors. They took the association out. And some of these names, they just live on. But with the single ID number, you don't have to worry about its name. You can just follow that ID. Because in name changes in general, if a company rebrands, the ID stays the same. Mergers and acquisitions can be a little trickier because maybe 2 smaller entities become one larger one that moves across town with a new name, or sometimes 3 might merge into one, and that one will become the thing, and the other, the ID of record, and the other 2 will become defunct. But we're tracking that at RESO. We're trying to make it easy. Why do we bother? Because the hope is consistency equals predictability. And that's what we're after. We want you to trust in what RESO is producing. So we go to this extra mile to do that. Tony Beach, Senior Director, Data Services at eXp Realty said, as a national brokerage and a member of roughly 500 MLSs, it's important for us to speak the same MLS identity language. Our RESO certified MLS API and metadata rely heavily on the current RESO UI standard. Okay, now I've been told to prove that people are using it. So I found 3 quotes. People are thankfully using it. But we need to get MLS vendors to use it because our certification, the new cool RESO analytics that you're using, we use the UOI as a backend to get that stuff accurately into the analytics tool. And when we when we asked all of these vendors to give us their client lists, what we found is that they were using the ID number incorrectly. In one case, 52.6% of the time, another 71.3% inaccurate. And we're not saying that to shame them. This is our fault. We have the wrong ID system. We need to simplify it. And that's why we want to change right now. The UI business case is organizations should have one unique identifier. Business practices, roles may change, but not unique identifiers. And we want to expand on the UOI as well. We've talked in research and development about new ideas. Some of them are actually old things that we just need to fix. The way we present the OUID API, the fields we use are type, name, address, city. Those aren't data dictionary fields for the OUID resource. So we're just going to finally use the proper names that we decided are supposed to be used. We want to add a couple of new categories. We know it's going to be really hard to get all the brokers in America or in the world into this thing. It's a goal. You got to have a goal, lofty BHAG, right? But we're going to start with franchisers and see what we can do from there. And then capture the legal name because we know that's important to some people. So we're going to do better ID numbers. Right now we have these M and A numbers with like 18 zeros in them and nobody can, memorize them or think about what their number is. It's now down to a 6-digit number. We want to also capture what we've been kind of calling the experience record. We're doing some of that now, and it's maybe the most popular thing that is used is what associations are related to what MLSs. We also now have got way better records thanks to reaching out to the technology vendors, MLSs and who they use. And we also are capturing MLS to pool platform. But we want to do more with brokers eventually. Which technology vendors are they using? Which brokers are part of which MLSs? And so that this new system, we believe, will make it easier. We're going to call that, right now it's just tentative. All this has to go through Data Dictionary to approve. R&D is behind it, but we're calling it related UOI for now. I'm this UOI, what am I also related to in the industry for this full experience record? I just skipped over one, didn't I? There we go. So the fact that we have these old the old OUID numbers are not going to go away. We're going to hold on to them as legacy numbers because we don't want to break anybody's systems. There will just be a new UI number with it. And we're adding this notion of type. Okay, so since we're breaking the letter off from the ID, we have to still know what they are. So we've got these letter codes for brokerage, local association, MLS. We're going to attack it in a different way as well. I'll show you that in a second. So what happens is if you are the Northeast Georgia Board of Realtors as an association and an MLS, you become a type L for local, a type M for MLS. And here's another way we're entering data into this, is if you just want to know what organizations are MLSs in the industry, there will be a field called organization name MLS. You can sort by that and by active and by United States and immediately know how many MLSs there are in the US. We're going to add organization website. That was just forgotten. We have organization phone, organization fax, organization social media, but we forgot website. So we're going to try to get that in there. And latitude, longitude, you've heard others talk about the importance of getting latitude, longitude information. Now that we've added that to all the addresses of all these businesses, we were able to create this cool certification map. We couldn't have done that without that long. And we added our own local field called certification name so we can address every way something is named. And then that legal name I'm telling you about, I call it the Doctors Associates Inc. of what we're doing here. Subway, their real name is Doctors Associates Inc. Just like North Star MLS in my market is really Regional Multiple Listing Service of Minnesota Incorporated. And that is embedded in many systems, especially in Minnesota. But nobody knows what that is if they see North Star emblazoned across everything. So our next frontiers are to add more tech companies, more brokers and franchises, more commercial companies. And if you have a list that you keep in your world, please share it. We need help. And that's how this thing got started in the first place. Different companies gave us lists and we cleaned it up. There's no need to worry. We'll hold on to the old OUID numbers if it's in your system. And to finish, I've got a few fun facts because I manage all this information. I want to share some numbers. There are just 2,000 active entries in the OUID. When we flattened it down, we now have about 1,500. So we lost about 500 extra IDs. Total entries is about 2,700 and 2,000, meaning we also track when something disappears from our industry because that is probably on a list somewhere. And they're like, what happened to that company? I get asked about that stuff all the time. Like, where is this? And thankfully, we keep track of it. An ID doesn't go away. It just becomes marked as inactive. There are over 1,000 local associations in the US, 579 MLSs. Different companies count them differently. T360 might count something different than RPR. We count what we can certify. So it might not have a shingle, might not have a physical address, but if it can be certified, we're adding it to the list for now. 69 local associations in Canada. We just finally have some Canadian information. 38 MLSs in Canada. That's a little better than 579. We only have 151 technology companies. We know there's about, plenty more, 500, 600 technology companies we should be counting. But this number was only 45 last year at this time. So we've added 100. I imagine we'll add 2 or 3 more hundred by next year at this time. And then we'll really have a good sense of all the tech going on in real estate. You can find all this information at reso.org. Up in the upper right under certification or identifiers. This stuff is all right there. And otherwise, you can find me at gsax@reso.org or just tap my shoulder. Thanks, guys.
Before Greg disappears, does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? If by all means, step up to the mic or shout out. All right, you're off the hook. Get out of here.
Thanks, Greg. Great
Get
work.
off my stage.
Lots of work there. Thank you. So, as we say, we're going to kind of pivot from the presentations to conversations. So, I mean, we just thought we'd take a few minutes with an open mic to really talk about what's on your mind. Where or how can the standard better serve your business needs? If you're an MLS, if you're a vendor, obviously it's really evolved over the many years and things are getting better. But our job is really to always ask that question. And where do we come up short? Where do we sometimes just not make it? Because I know I was doing an implementation for the API, and we run good old MS SQL. Well, the word view and order were really quite a little bit of a problem when you're trying to build a query that includes those words in there because they're keywords. So, I mean, we had to actually, bend a little bit of code to deal with that. So, I mean, there may be places where it's just easier to implement if we can, kind of look at, the different kind of technologies that people are using and where do we kind of add a little bit more of an easy button or something like that to it. So that's what, we're here to listen and hear from you guys. And, as John always liked to say, consensus of crickets is a really hard thing because, I mean, let's be honest.
You always say that, Greg, not
Yes,
me.
yes.
That's your
We
expression.
always know that, there are always places that we can improve. So, I mean, just know we're here to do that.
So now we're going to have some awkward silence until somebody talks about something and brings something up. Does anyone have anything?
Or we just move on, folks. Gets us close. As I say, the further along we get, the closer that John and I get to have a beer. So you're not going to hurt our feelings. So let's give you a little bit of background. I know you've heard about unique licensing identifier. People are, as we all know, licensed in multiple geographies. They cross state lines. Some are realtors and some aren't realtors. Some MLSs capture a NERDS ID, others don't. So, I mean, how do you, take a data set and deduplicate that with any kind of confidence that, Greg Moore is Greg Moore with, 3 different license numbers across 3 different states? Those kinds of things are what we're really here to try and solve for the business of our business. As Greg says, associations change, people change brokerages, all of those kinds of things. They subscribe to many services. And as we put on a presentation, I think in the fall, we think about a showing service or something where you've got, kind of multiple SSOs or something based on, which MLS you happen to hit that platform from. And can we solve that so there's, more integration and a better experience for users? Obviously, duplicate and misaligned license data, licensee data. And I mean, think of, your CRMs, your, association management type systems. And, everybody's got a unique code within your MLS, but, they really start to silo off when you're exchanging data and those kinds of things.
But even to that point, even within just one MLS, you'll see, a lot of us will have the same person in there 3, 4, 5 times because just the way our MLS systems are set up, right? We need them to have access to each branch office. So we're serving up Jim Jones 5 times just from one MLS, and hopefully they all have the Nerds ID with them, so you know it's the same Jim Jones, but you might not. So I mean, forget multiple systems, just from one MLS, it can be a big problem.
Yeah, and I mean, Josh did some great data analysis for us, and I mean, you really find that. And then, especially in John's market, I mean, there was one broker, for all of the pilot MLSs that participated,
Oh, yeah.
they were there mostly, often multiple times as a principal broker across 3 or 4
I think
different
one
MLSs.
of the MLSs has one person in 10 times.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon. Um, and as you can see, we're really just trying to, kind of put some clarity or, build this out. So, when you're exchanging data, when Realtor.com shows your listings, they can deduplicate. They can do those kinds of things to really, make things a little smoother, a little smarter. When your franchisor wants to run some statistics on agents, they don't need to kind of, get the special decode key to figure out, you do belong and do transactions in 5 or 6 or 7 MLSs, depending on where you're at. So, we know that, more and more, this business isn't as hyper local as it used to be. There are many kind of, and I've got some interesting data about geography and where people are. As we say, statistics and those kinds of things really are key. And I mean, many people have spent many, many years and written many algorithms to it. But I think if we can come together as an industry, it'll really make a difference for the industry itself and for data clarity. So, why are we doing this? And I mean, what Josh has really kind of collaborated closely with us is, we put together kind of a scoring algorithm. So as, people start joining different MLSs, the idea is, can we give you a 80% confidence that this really is the same Greg Moore in Oregon and Washington and California? Based on maybe the company I work for, my name, my Nerds address, because obviously you're just looking at 3 different license numbers across those 3 states. So, that's always a challenge. And then, what he calls collaborative filtering. And that's really that human interaction too at some point. It may be that, an email goes out, the system automatically sends an email to your neighboring or in some instances across the country MLS. It says, this looks really familiar. Why don't you guys, take a moment and chat? Or somebody reach out to that member and say, do you have a Oregon license and a Nevada license? I mean, you think in the East Coast, it may be I have a Maine license and I have a Florida license because that's where I spend, part of the year in both places. So that's, kind of that hybrid of using technology and scoring with some kind of confidence and then really figuring out how you can get those touch points to really get clarity and, and refine that. And we find that really without some kind of human interactivity, you're going to run into problems. I mean, not to pick on our friends at NAR, but Nerds is not perfect. And, some of it is it's just easier to create a new one when someone walks in your door than to do the search and that conversation. So we're trying to really take a lift with technology on this one.
Yeah, we're really trying to sort of minimize the human effect. I mean, there's a human factor, but we want to sort of, as much as we can, sort of minimize that, this sounds like a knock or whatever, but maybe the local staff person that's either lazy and not, following the procedure. This guy right here is okay. Who's not going in and maybe searching to see if this person already exists and has a Nerds number, and they just create the new record. And then the next thing you know, we have somebody with 2 different Nerds numbers and that kind of thing. So if we can build an algorithm that can sort of, as much as it can, prevent that from happening, that's a big part of the problem that I think we can solve.
Yeah.
So
here's kind of a sample of the pilot, work that Josh did for us to give you just kind of a sense of what that UI may look like when you, bring in someone, and, if you've got their state license, license type sometimes matters. We were doing the pilot in the Northwest with RMLS and Northwest MLS to find out we had from, Northwest and us the exact same person with the same license number in Washington, but one was a principal broker and one was an agent, and Washington kind of reuses some of those numbers. So Sometimes even for filtering, it may help to know, what kind of license, an appraiser license compared to a principal broker license to compared to an agent license.
So what you're looking at here is really sort of a mock-up of a UI, that you would use, the sort of what we imagine is this is what your staff, at the association or the MLS, wherever the member record is created, would use to query the ULI system to see if there is, in fact, if the ULI that exists for somebody. So in this case, I mean, these are the fields that we're using. These are all from the member resource, RESO member resource, and so you type in as little or as much as you want, and you can see the green arrows here shows where you have a match. And a big part of this is what we don't want is for participants in this their roster data just to be publicly available or just completely available so somebody can just go in and start basically farming their
Yeah,
their
kind of
roster.
farming, yeah.
So the idea with this is that you would get some sort of match up top. You would see some set of data, a name, a license number, the items that you've hit on when they're above a certain confidence threshold. So in this case, you use 70%. So when there's a 70, and that number can be adjusted and tweaked, so we know if there's a 70% confidence score or higher, it's fairly likely it's the same person. So this information will be made visible where you can then go in and look a little further to determine if it is the same person. And if it's below 70%, you'll get some subset of information on the bottom and the ability to contact that source to reach out and say, hey, I've got, I'm blind as a bat here.
Jay Smith.
I've got Jennifer Smith here. Is this the same Jennifer Smith, and move from there. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're also trying, obviously, is to protect his PII. I mean, across many states now, we've got to be very conscious, too, of what's flying out there and what gets stored, even if it's, encrypted, et cetera. So, I mean, if you really think about getting to a state licensing site, you see this information. Licenses in most states, or at least in many states that I've poked around, are certainly available publicly by typing in somebody's name. So, I mean, we're really trying to be cognizant of all those kinds of things while we're trying to solve this business case problem. So I say in RMLS, I just did some poking. So, I mean, right now we have 13 MLSs that provided data to the pilot, and I think that may be growing. So basically in the data set, we've got 150,000 agents. But what I did is basically we serve Oregon and Southwest Washington at RMLS. We don't serve all of Oregon or anything like that. But what surprised me was that beyond the 2 states that we serve, there are realtors, because we are a realtor MLS, from 27 other states. And I mean, talk about north to south and east to west. We had one participating broker in Ontario, Canada. So, I mean, though it's probably about 1% of our, membership data, it was amazing to me how far flung these folks are. And JJ from Utah kind of ran the same query with very similar results. It was amazing, for a Utah MLS to see, I think, 20 something other states that they have members in. And they weren't just surrounding Utah. I mean, there aren't that many states, that can touch that state. So it's really, I think what we're finding is I always believed, and, I'm old and I've done this a long time, that you'd expect them to be fairly hyper local. You'd expect in Oregon to see somebody from Idaho and maybe California and a few places. But when, you're looking at the Carolinas and Florida and Texas and everywhere else, it was really interesting. So, I mean, it was just, I thought it was an interesting study, but the results did surprise me at how far these folks are. So,
They're coming for you, Greg.
yeah, they're coming.
You're the
And I mean,
draw.
but if you really think this is also a great business case for ULI. I mean, the Texas MLS wants to, at least as data moves into franchisers, it should be nice for them to know it really is that same person, that's doing business, in these states and, creating value to those businesses.
So this really is I mentioned earlier, what are we asking for in the pilot? What's the data that we're using? This is it. we're really not asking, the participants to serve up any sort of secret information. This is, pretty readily available data, but we feel that this is really all we need to get significant success in this project.
Yeah.
So what we want to do now, we want to get some people up here to discuss this because there are a lot of questions that that we sort of need help from the community and how this moves forward. So our panelists that are here, don't be bashful, guys. Come on up.
Come on up. So you guys all know Josh.
We'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Is Mike on? Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Olga chicken out. Where'd she go?
Sit next to you. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, she can come up.
Cool.
She can come up later. I thought, Paul, do you want to be a panelist? You look
No,
like
thank
you were
you.
kind of heading for the stage.
Just gotta free up the computer.
Welcome. If you got something to say,
I always have something to say.
Oh, you want your laptop?
No, we're gonna do some presentation.
Oh, you want?
The ULI paper, I'll probably show the desk.
Yeah, it's a good thing to know. All right, perfect. All right, well, while we're doing that, you guys have lab. You want to just introduce yourselves? Do you have a lab mic on?
No.
Here, go ahead, Jay. Why don't you go first?
I'm Jay Pepper Martins from San Francisco. We're involved in the pilot, and we have some problems with agent IDs, which we'll talk about today.
I'm good. I have my name is Brian Tepp from the EVP and CTO Rapatoni, and I'm going to be helping them on the technology side to do the pilots for some of these associations.
Thank you. All right, Josh, you going live, or what are you doing?
I think I'm live.
Oh, you got that. Okay.
Been talking a lot today. Josh Donnell here, CTO of RESO. I've been working on this project with all the participants here and deep dive into the data set. I worked on the scoring algorithm and some of the tech stuff we're going to talk about today.
It's an exercise in trust. I'm live. Yes, it is.
Come on up. If you were nervous about being on stage, this is not nerve-wracking at all, being kind of coming up right now. Come on up. Go ahead. Josh.
They found you.
Greg, again, like for
It's all right. We'll get through this. Let Josh sort of kind of go on in, then we'll introduce all of that.
you can go ahead.
Oh, all right. Okay, here, I'll go. Just introduce.
I'm sorry for being late. CoreLogic meeting is still going. My name is Olga Ermolin. I am a director of engineering at MLS Listings.
I shouldn't let this cat out of the bag, but I hear that there's beer at the CoreLogic thing. Yeah, no, now we know why you were late.
So here's a slide you probably saw in an earlier presentation that Olga and Jay actually shared with us, but it really speaks to our business case. When you think about, I think there's like 6 or 7 MLSs there, and they're all exchanging data. And I mean, and obviously you can imagine there's many crossover members across these different markets, so it again speaks to the need for this business case. So maybe we can hand off a little bit and let you share some information where the pain is, because we know there's pain.
Okay, so we've been sharing data in the Bay Area for a long time now. We're on 15 years or 16 years of that. You saw me present yesterday talking about a solution called Quattro, where it was a search database. That didn't work for members because it was something they had to go to all the time. We had to train them on this continuously. So the solution really needed to be all the data in our home systems. So not only do we have a new solution that has full deep reciprocal data share of listing data, we're now trading all of the roster information at the same time. And one of the pain points we've got is agent data. We've got not only someone who's signed up in multiple organizations, we've got cases where we've actually replicated roster data between one another.
Yes, and in addition to that, we didn't stop with just exchanging property data, right? Our data share, I think, is unique in a sense that we also enabled tours for each other. We are working on enabling our users access disclosures into each other's systems, enabling users to schedule showings, things like that. So this goes a little bit beyond of the kind of typical data share.
imagine that all that native data comes with unique identifiers for those same agents that, so I mean, there's got to be something we can do, right?
Well, I
to
think
bring
that's the
that up.
problem is they're all they're all in different systems. They're in different membership systems, and they're all in disparate MLSs. So to have one unique ID that ties everything together, is like think of the real solution to the challenge. Because as Olga and I were speaking about before, we've had challenges moving and matching up member IDs, and so I think hopefully the ULI will help address that.
I remember when we released our most recent data share solution a little bit over a year ago. How many hours you and I spent?
Evenings.
Evenings,
hours.
late for you sometimes in Canada, early
That's
for
right.
me, different time. Trying to resolve exactly what Brian just mentioned, because we inherited 10 years or so worth of data where we allowed people to reciprocate into each other's systems and create listings with all these different IDs that now have to be resolved. That was not fun.
And it's more than one vendor. So we've got 3 different MLS vendors, and then it's 7 MLS companies. So if everyone didn't solve the problem identically, you get different results in different solutions. So the way we solved it inside the Rapatoni system between the 3 of us works great for the 3 of us. That's Barry's, San Francisco, and Metrolist that we presented on yesterday. But the solution in the East Bay is a different one, and then Olga's solution is slightly different yet. So because it's not identical, we get different results, and this leads to us trying to close listings and assigning the wrong agent ID on the closed listing. And so reports can be broken. We're fixing a lot of this data when we find edge cases ourselves right now. We're doing a lot of manual updates. So that's the sort of last piece that we have to solve is the roster and office information uniqueness. Right, so this exactly is what I was talking about. In the East Bay, you've got 3 MLSs that have a strategy they use for figuring out the agent ID information, and then SFAR, Barry's, and Metrolist. We all have a really good strategy that works for us, and then Olga has her strategy at MLS listings, but none of the 3 of us all solve it identically, and there's the problem.
For having one agent ID, have one agent with one ULI allows all the systems to match one ID to one agent instead of having one agent with 7 IDs.
So, really, we did put together some critical success factors for this project. I mean, it's always nice to know, when you hit the bullseye, or at least what we're aiming for. So, a couple of things we'd love to talk about with you guys is, how real time does this matching have to be, right? I mean, do you want it instantaneously? I mean, as you can imagine, I'm sure, across the country, many agents now can sign up electronically. So, I mean, it's not like they're standing at the front desk waiting for something. So, I mean, it may pay to have a little bit of latency so we really can, kind of comb the system and build those confidence scores and basically, send a message, to the other MLSs that, someone may be participating in.
But I think that's a good point, though. It says you onboard a member, there are going to be certain data points that aren't readily available. So if a new member signs up, they might not be signed to NERDS ID yet. And so there's your confidence score and already taking a hit because that doesn't exist if you're trying to get a ULI from the get-go. So there needs to be some sort of process of they're a member for 24 hours, 36 hours, and then they try to get assigned an ID.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, you're right.
Thankfully, the strategy that Josh has been articulating here is that it wouldn't just be NERDS ID. So the reason I think this is going to work is that other factors may total up to a certain level of confidence, which is going to mean you don't maybe need the NERDS ID right out of the gate in order to make an assertion that it's likely these are the same, Bob Jones or whatever. So in terms of how real time it needs to be, it definitely needs to work where the membership person at SFAR is helping someone sign up, whether in person or not. But they need to be able to input the information and get some sense of, this is actually a person from somewhere else already.
And so one thing, can you hear me all right? I think I'm all right. I don't know if this was addressed because I was still having a beer, but that's not true. So, and so one of the things too with the ULI is it's not our intention that that the individual members actually know the ULI. This is an under the hood identifier that's really for data consumers to use for the matching and sort of fixing this problem. So this sort of idea that when a member comes in, you want them to leave with their their MLS login credentials and their ULI number. They're not going to need to know the ULI number. So it's not really our intention. So, I mean, that sort of speaks a little bit to this real time and how real time does it need to be. It doesn't have to be when they walk out the door necessarily that they need their ULI, or the ULI needs to be created because they need to know it. It really comes down to, I guess, data now going out without a ULI, and then how does that data now, how does the ULI catch up with the data that's already gone out? So, and that's really sort of a question we have. We know, I mean, I would love to hear opinions on this when we open it up for questions and comments. How real time do you need it to be?
Then, as Greg pointed out, in his slides, I mean, there are 570 or so MLSs in the country. So, and to get success, I mean, we really need the participation across those. I mean, if we're not at 90%, it's not going to really work well for anybody, in my humble opinion. So, I mean, the question obviously is, you guys go home as MLSs, et cetera, how willing are these organizations, to share data to solve this
Remember
problem?
data, yep.
I mean, you're seeing some great sharing going on in the Bay Area. We're sharing roster data and things like that in the Northwest. But I mean, this has to really become coast to coast. And in one of my business examples, we've got somebody in Canada. So I mean, it'd be really nice to be able to really kind of think about, the U.S. and Canada at some point. Because I mean, Armless can't be the only person. I mean, and we're, a state down from the Canadian border. I'm sure as you get closer, you're going to find many more members
Overlapping.
participating.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because this is sort of like what we look at as like the politics, right? What's the challenge with the success on this? And like with a lot of things, a lot of times it just comes down to politics. But in your area, there are a lot of MLSs, right? And you're bordering each other. And so you would think, data sharing might be a concern, but yet you folks are doing that. I mean, is this something you can sort of speak to? Is that a concern in your marketplace?
So thankfully, I'm on technical side of things,
Yeah.
and we have other people in the company who deal with politics. And I'm sure it's present, but in our market where JNI and Metrolis Berries is Bay, we're next to each other. We share service areas. You've seen the map. The reality is that we have offices where half the agents belong to one MLS and the other half belongs to another MLS in San Carlos, San Mateo County, which is serviced by both of us, which means these agents co-list together, or one agent is a selling agent, another one is a buyer agent. They don't want to know that some IDs don't match. They want things to work. They want to go to one place where they can see their production, what they've sold, where they represented buyers, how many times, regardless what MLS they belong to. And this is what we're trying to solve. So we work around things like, I think we've had amazing cooperation and collaboration in our area. And we've addressed a lot of these issues. It would have been much easier to address them if ULI was in place. So we have to jump through many hoops to make it work.
And to Olga's point exactly, the agents don't care about the politics.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely a reality, but they're working in that same office in San Carlos, and for them, they're just scratching their heads wondering what our problem is, right? So I think that we're going to have to, as an industry, in some cases, set aside the fact that we feel like our politics is more important than their business. I've been saying this for a long time, that I just think sometimes you have to share the data where it makes sense in order for the agents to be effective. So I hope we can overcome the political boundaries that may still be presented in front of us. I'd like to disagree with Greg, though. I don't actually care.
I do too.
Okay. I don't care if the rest of the country wants to do this. We're going to do this because it solves a real pain point for us. So I'm excited to put all that data into the algorithm and have it tell us where the duplicates are so we can solve this. And then if that's a model where other people say, hey, we've got that problem too, and we're going to try to solve it on our side of the country, great, I hope you do. But I don't care. And then maybe there's some magical day in
Well,
the
I'm glad we
future.
got you on the panel, Jay. Thanks for being an advocate for the ULI solution.
I'm just being honest, which doesn't make a person popular, but whatever. Anyway,
No,
so but on the East Coast and the West Coast, if you had two of these things that had unique IDs in them, then they could be deduplicated together, just like two MLSs can. So I don't see why you wouldn't want to do 5 of them all over the place and then resolve those.
Yeah, right.
So I think I can speak to this part a little bit. This group has some decisions to make now. We have to figure out who to send this work to next and how we're going to do it. This work initially started off as RESO running a centralized service. That's completely contrary to everything we've ever done. And personally, I don't want to get the calls at 3 a.m. for the service going down. And
Did you turn your lav mic off?
it's on.
Is it? Oh.
Personally, I don't want to get the calls at 3 in the morning when the system goes down and people can't deduplicate people. So it would be nice if RESO didn't run it themselves. The question is, can we do this in such a way where we can have what looks like a central source of truth without one person running it? If we were to approach the problem using standards, we have the APIs, we have the dictionary. What we could do is if somebody wanted to do a search, depending on how strict their real-time search requirements were, you could just search all the providers. And that's much less than searching 500 MLSs at a time. If we could address that higher upstream with the AMSs, that's only a few, right? So maybe using standards, using the dictionary is good there. There are conveniences for people sharing data though. So we're kind of looking at other options at the transport level to maybe have nodes running with some kind of ledger. All these things are synced in real time, depending on people's comfortability with that. And we can protect the data as well. It works the best if you can search kind of in real time like you saw on the screen earlier, and you can get the matches back right away. It doesn't have to work that way. It can be downstream and reacting to these new agents coming in and then matching it that way.
So as Josh is saying, I mean, data security is going to always be a concern. Let's be honest. I mean, you're not going to want to really just have a wide open roster with the rest of the country or even sometimes your neighbor. But this one off or two offs for a Greg Moore, a Gregory Moore kind of thing, makes sense if I all work for ABC Realty kind of. So one of the work products that we put out, kind of as that R&D ULI work group is a white paper that really kind of takes the business case with some technology underneath to really try and explain it to you and usually your leadership.
And where can you find this, Greg?
I believe you find this on RESO.
No, uli.reso.org. Come on,
ULI.
man, I threw you a softball.
Yep. uli.reso.org. So
right. And I think to your point, Greg, is that we're talking about being custodians of data and where this is housed. And that's where I think, looking at this from, a vendor perspective, whether it's an AMS vendor, an MLS vendor, whatever, we already are the custodians of data. We have over 1 million member realtors. So to us, we don't care what association you belong to. We had to take the same security stance regardless. And I'm assuming that's for, MMSI or whoever you're using, is they house membership data across multiple associations. And so that infrastructure should be in place where they could silo that information, segment it, and put something there for everybody to query, and then gain that confidence that that data is not only secure, but it's housed appropriately. And hopefully it takes that politic level away from the situation where it's an independent source.
Yeah, independent is good. I just want to go through this white paper quickly. uli.reso.org. There's actually a link to a GitHub repository here as well with some more technical material. There's an overview section, kind of goes over the problem we're trying to solve. What is the motivation? Why are we working on this? Very important. There are a lot of systems that try to do this, but none do it in the way that we're trying to do it, across borders, across countries. So we could have coverage for basically everybody. There's business requirements outlined, a lot of them, and critical success factors. And then there's kind of the methodology for those who are on the tech side. So regardless of where this is run, what's in this box has to be run somewhere. And that's kind of the critical part. Greg talked about earlier the searching and the collaborative filtering. That's what this represents. New information comes in, it gets scored. If the confidence is higher than a certain amount, it gets sent off to this resolver network. Then notifications get sent out and routed to all the places who might be interested in that data. At that point, they come to consensus. The system would coordinate that, and then that becomes the ULI. So if it's run on one system or many systems, this process just has to be run somewhere. There's a little bit about the scoring algorithm here if you're interested. We use a probabilistic consensus-based approach. It's an open source algorithm that is implemented in a bunch of technologies. So we're not just using data standards, we're using standards for algorithms here. A little bit about collaborative filtering, and then there's some more stuff about the technical down here. And Greg was talking earlier about different markets using this. This is what we've done with the previous pilot data. So we can already see that we're deduplicating people right now from what's on there. We've got Candace Adams here. they're in there 9 times in one MLS, 5 times in another, and 1 time in another. And we could give them a ULI right now. We could also see that, in the pilot, there's a lot of people who don't have a NERDS number. It's about 80-20 actually, which is amusing. So in this part of the pilot, before we brought in the Bay Area, we had about 110,000 members. There's the split. And then you can actually see what Greg was talking about earlier. We have this map here of those, and you see little spots here once in a while. And that little spot is, there's a member in RMLS who actually is living in Texas, doing business there. They're probably doing business in Texas too, right? So we could probably assign the ULI that would work for Texas.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, what we'd like to hear, and you're certainly welcome to come to any of our meetings, so we can talk about those as we kind of wrap up, because I think we're about 5 minutes before we run out of time.
No, well, actually, we're going until 3, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
it's
we're
the
running till
R&D
3.
bleeding.
You
We
got
got 30 more
sorry.
minutes to
Yeah,
fill,
30
buddy. Come
minutes,
on.
yeah, oh,
Nice
here we go.
try. Well, we
So,
don't have to fill it, though.
I mean, where's the heartburn? Where would you be concerned to, pitch this to your boss? Those kinds of things that really matter for the success. Because as we say, we've got to get critical mass, which really means, folks got to agree that sharing data is healthy and it's good. And as Jay says, it could be starting in different regions for different business reasons, and then kind of a network to pull those together. We can look to AMS vendors who really are the trusted folks. If you think about our industry, they're taking payments from your folks and all those kinds of things. So you've got a secure partner there. So I mean, it's as we say, we're really trying to figure out, now that we've kind of got a well-shaped pilot, we've got some pretty darn good code that actually does the probabilistic matching. How do we, where do we take this next? Because it's really very close to time to start handing this off to the technical folks to really refine this. And, we know that Olga and Jay are going to tip this thing up. And I mean, they can do it in their bubble, or they can, kind of, that bubble can then grow. And
I'm not advocating for a bubble. I'm just saying that if all I can get is my
but,
bubble,
I mean, we want success.
Well,
so,
the thing is, to that point, though, to your customers, right? I mean, the bubble sort of works for you, but for them, the bubble, there's still another border at the end of that bubble, and they still have that problem stretching into new markets. So
the nice thing in this case, though, is that the technology, it can work either way. So it's more of a business decision how this works. And we need, if people want to share data and make it more real time and have a common pool, that's one way we can do it, and that's great. If they want to have separate nodes running and they maybe talk to each other based on permissions, you can work it that way too. It'll work either way.
So please share your thoughts, ideas.
do we have another slide after this with more
Yeah, we have
questions?
another
No.
slide. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, these are really the questions we would like to have the discussions about. Who runs it? And I mean, who are you comfortable running it? Is it the MLS next door? Is it, one of your trusted partners that, is trusted throughout the industry? Is it something that, somehow, gets tipped up with VC dollars? I mean, there's, how do we pull this thing off and really get the confidence of the industry that, what you're sending is safe and secure, and, it's not going to leak? Like we're saying, is it a common pool?
Maybe what we could do is like an applause meter. Like, should AMS's, and you can just clap if you think it should be AMS. Should it be an MLS?
Or does the bubble work, right?
So-
Whatever.
You just don't want to spend any more late nights.
Yeah. I mean, how's the data protected? And again, that's, I think, obviously speaks to trusted partners in my thoughts. And then how much latency, is acceptable? Do you, as you're entering someone and, they kind of, hit the system, and possibly, the MLS API, that matching starts to occur, and you want it much more instantaneously. So if somebody walks away almost, with that member record having a ULI, they don't need a code or a special key or anything like that. As John says, it's something that really runs under the hood, but it really solves, many, many business problems. So, listing data, roster data are just a few of them. If you think about data analytics and, many of the franchisors and their back-end systems and all the other parts of the industry that this really can help.
So, and just as I think as Josh says it, so we're at a point where we need to know where this goes next. And these are the questions we really need answers, and we need your help because we need to hear from the community. I mean, we all have our own opinions, but it's not us driving this. It's the community that has to move this forward. So if you want to speak to this right now, we'd love to hear it. We've got time. If not, we know we have the meetings once a month. You can come and express your opinion, look through the white paper, get up to speed on it, and then show up to the meeting and give us.
Maybe we can give a little bit of a head start. I mean, are there people in this room who would mind if their data were in a common pool? Maybe you could raise your hands. So it's 11-member fields. Are there any objections?
Is there anyone that's against having their data
Oh,
in a
against,
common pool?
that's the next,
You're right.
that's the next part. Yeah, against. So would you object to doing it? It's basically a roster data share for you if you opt in. You could run it by yourself. We could make that work, in the system.
Whoa, you could run it by yourself. So an MLS that is also its own technology vendor could run one of these, and I got to trust them?
Anybody can run it.
Okay.
If you trust them to run it, you could run your own. And then the question is, do we need to handle this case that Greg mentioned? There are people across borders. How would that work? There would be kind of a layer on top of that. We'd have to coordinate who is trusted at that point. So that makes the solution more complicated. It's a much simpler solution if everybody just puts the data in a common pool. It's been selected so that it's mostly roster data that's available on public websites anyway. But we know how the real estate industry is, right? And people don't necessarily want to share things they don't have to. And that's okay. The system can support that. What we need to know is what we can do on the tech side at the next step. What kind of assumptions can we make about that? Can we have a common pool? Because that's a different system than if it's not.
Were any of the fields we had in there controversial? Do you want to go back to that slide? Can we go back to it and show what's going to be scored on? So when I took a look at this, it didn't look particularly controversial to me. I mean, is any of this really even PII?
No.
I mean, some of the name information, I guess, but
Nothing counts.
right. So I felt like none of this was super controversial. I mean, I'm comfortable giving this to everybody. How about you, Olga?
I have unpopular opinion.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
My gut feeling is that we will probably do it internally. I'm looking at Joel. No. Just like we've done with UPI, we'll probably start, how about that? We will start doing this internally in our own system for our roster with the data share roster. That takes care of the security issues because we already share members' data. We'll address our
we have
cases.
a license that lets us do that, right?
Yes.
It's not like we're just sharing it because we feel like it. If anyone's curious, we actually have an underlying data license agreement between the 7 of us that clearly articulates what we can and can't do.
That's a good point, by the way. We have a license right now for the pilot as well, and it's anticipated that anyone that would enter into the ULI would sign this license. So it's not just a free-for-all, dump your stuff in this database and have at it. There would, be license agreements.
Well, I think that also speaks to the management of how you get ULI. So like if you're in your membership system, you have a ULI field. When you want to generate that, it takes this payload of data, takes it to the API source, gets that back, and you manage it there. But you would get an API key, you get those credentials by signing the license agreement that you're agreeing to it. So I think there's a lot of inherent checks and balances.
Hello, Paul.
Hello. I had a couple questions and a comment about some of the information on the screen right here. The license information is generally widely available at the state level on public websites. You can go in, type a name, find out if they've got a license for all kinds of things. Whatever that state is licensing, almost every single state, we've built systems that do that.
Right.
They publish that information. So none of that's going to be PII. Someone might think it is, of course, and then we'll find out in the court what it actually is, but it's currently publicly available. The question I had, though, is there's a number of IDs in here. Where are those coming from? And are they only relevant in the originating system or the source system? Or are they part of the existing organization ID? Where is all that coming from?
So that's a good question. The source system name and identifiers and the origin, those are something we'd assign from the inbound records. So we know which records came from where so that we could route those consensus requests.
I think
For the rest of the IDs, I think that we just added the office ID or office MLS ID. Maybe Jay can speak to that.
Well, Olga, I think one of the
yeah, the IDs actually just recently looked at that data. These are not IDs like some system generated keys. these are actually names for like would be example would be San Francisco or Recal or MLS listings or an aggregate name. So they're more meaningful. The values are more meaningful than the name kind of implies.
Okay, thank you.
Consensus crickets?
No
I
news
guess
is good
nobody
news.
minds if
Go
we do
ahead,
this,
go
so
ahead.
we'll do it.
So the question is, do all of these or most of these field names align with the data dictionary? These are the data dictionary names. These are actually straight from the member resource and the
We actually
office.
went through them with the certification tools to see what the availability was, and most of them have very high availability. So we can kind of rely on it.
And then in preparation for this, I think Josh, didn't you or I go through these and check to see that the names were either identical or
Yeah.
almost identical?
Yeah, there were some corrections, and there might be still more corrections. These can change. That's a nice thing about the scoring algorithm. There's not a bunch of code underneath the hood that says if it's this field, do this. It's probabilistic, and it's a weighted scoring algorithm where it's almost we just weight the combinations that should rank higher. If we find that combination, it wins over the ones that rank lower. So we can actually adjust this thing from feedback from the network in real time and improve the matching over time.
But it's kind of the beauty of using standards to create standards, if you think about it.
Take a mic, buddy.
Kind of off-the-shelf Elasticsearch is what we've been playing with, but I mean, it's got great tools in it. So it's not like we're trying to create our own scoring algorithm. The tool itself comes up with that for us.
Yeah, and it's from an open standard. It's called Okapi BM25, which you could look up on Wiki. But this existed for a while to help search large information stores. So we're using an open source standard algorithm for that.
Here's Mr. Larson.
Rob, here's trouble.
Hi there.
Hey.
Okay, as far as how real time, I think it should be very. And
Define very.
sorry, Brian, I think that very as in the person standing in the office, that you have some evidence, right? You're talking about weighted scores. As soon as you have any evidence, then you have that person there and you can ask the questions, right? I think that'd be very important to add to, and also I think you're going to need some PII as well, right? And it's information that you have, you just got to figure out to have enough of it. A phone number is a really good piece of evidence. An email address is a good piece of evidence, right? And there's addresses and all those other things. So I think putting that scope together and having the real-time interaction, you can take that, say this hits 95%, you can take it up to 99.999 by having that interaction in there.
Well, I think what I was saying is that when you're talking about batching it out, the technology could support a real-time query, right? So it's going to take whatever information you do, create a payload, get that information, get it back. I think it's a matter of how much data do you put into your system that's going to weight that score. So your score might not be as relevant based on what you have in front of you versus what you could get, the next day.
Yeah. And I think a data share environment is perfect because you've already got the data there, but you have to transcend that. You might not want to have a data share, but you still want to solve the problem. And then I think that getting into the let's do a roster data share answer for those localities. And as this thing grows, then maybe it becomes a national thing. And working with, because NAR, even though any database isn't perfect, they've got a lot of evidence in there. So that should be part of the equation as well as the NERDS database.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we would want that integration for sure. And I think the idea of having kind of a PII check in the office is great because we don't necessarily have to store that information. But once we pull up the record that we found, you could actually ask somebody, are you really that person? Check the PII, and then we have a higher confirmation of a match.
But that's stored in your AMS system.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So it's there, so you could batch it out
You could do it too.
in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, you'd never expect to, have somebody from Texas in RMLS in Portland, Oregon, but, they're there. So, I mean, it is fairly wide reaching, and that's kind of the interesting thing. But I think as Rob said, I mean, it's always nice to say, and do you have a license in another state? It's kind of a leading question and they can share that information without, really, passing over the counter, any kind of, a leak. Well, there is another Gregory Moore. Well, I'm sure there's many in this world, and there may be realtors. Thank God bless them, but whatever. So, but yeah, I mean that's the idea here, and I mean it's really kind of coming together as an industry to find that kind of happy place in some ways where you're comfortable with the tolerance of data, and as I continue to lean on, I think a trusted partner. And you think in the Bay Area, these are trusted partners. They have data from all their neighbors on their local systems.
But I'd still like if someone from an MLS that's not part of our NorCal Alliance wanted to also check and make sure that someone in I don't know wherever Idaho, I don't care, whether they exist in my system and we could tell them, yeah, we've already got that person. I definitely want them to be able to do that. So even if you're in an area that doesn't have a bunch of contentious markets around you or however you want to describe it, I think this still makes sense for you to implement because then you're going to get a unique identifier for that human being and you'll know it's them. It's just this one person. And we'll know too. Right? Somewhere else where we have that one person showing up, they join in California, then we'll know too.
I mean, as we approach this, I mean, let's be honest, the only really, personally identifiable identifier for a person's a social security number. And the last thing you ever want to have on your membership system or, flying encrypted, through your systems to somebody else's. So, I mean, it really, the mountain got pretty high as we were really trying to figure this out. But,
We actually removed that from our system for that reason. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, years and years ago, it was the happy day that we just nulled those fields out completely because we used to collect them, believe it or not.
It used to be the login, MLS login, and you log in using your social security number. Boom.
So,
well,
I mean, are we on to something? I mean, let's
trying to go
ask
get beer.
You guys.
I'm like,
I mean,
well,
at
are we
least
done?
for some idea. I mean, is this something that you
wanna get some
believe you can
bonus?
get behind and try, say with the white paper and other information? Because I know for me, at some point, I'm going to have to stand before our board and, basically tell them why this is a great idea. And it really will solve, business problems without really putting anything at RMLS really at risk. And, it's good for the industry. It's good for us locally, certainly good for our neighbors where, like these guys are saying, folks are doing business across MLSs and borders. And, and you think about folks who are trying to create statistics when they get, the same sale 3 or 4 times and having to scrub that data out. Or, we've had Realtor.com come and talk to us about all the work they do, when they're trying to kind of clean up their display. So your search result doesn't have 1, 2, 3 Main Street, stacked right over each other because of the nuance of what system provided it. So, I mean, there's many, many great use cases here. And, and I mean, we're here to talk about this. We'll continue a bit of talk, but I mean, we'd really like to see this kind of, obviously go live in our pilot markets where, folks will be filling in, ULIs, and we can probably come back in the fall and talk about that with you guys. And, really like, John's saying there's a new agreement there so we can build out this pilot. Sir.
I think we need a mic on over
hold
here.
on.
All right.
There you go.
I think one of the best things about this is we can retire that stupid name, the nerds number. So, second thing, this is a no-brainer. We should absolutely do it, and we should do it soon, speaking from the broker perspective, so we can move on to more important issues. You guys have done a great job. It's not disclosing social security numbers. We should just do it. We shouldn't talk about it for another 15.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Gail?
There you go.
So with the ULI as it's built out here, and I'm understanding the different components that go into the checks. So say, Greg, for example, you have an agent, Jen Jones in Portland, and I have an agent, Jennifer Jones, in Texas, but I don't reach that 70% threshold because I didn't know there was a Portland, Oregon license. You didn't know there was a Texas license, so on and so forth. Is there any notion of merging records together or contacts together after we come to know that that is
Yes.
the same person.
Yeah, I mean, we've really had to talk about that, right? Because I mean, there could be, many people who start out with two, ULIs. So I mean, how do we really relate those records together, and then broadcast kind of what the prevailing one is? Or if you think about relational data, you've got the two of them, and they become really that same record. I think it's really helpful, for a franchise system to have the one key. But so I mean, there was some idea about kind of the last in, first out, so we can clean those things up. Because if you think about personally where we'd store this, we're not going to really store it in the listing. We'd store it in the member record and then feed it obviously with the listing data. But we don't have to replicate it a million times. So if we had to clean something up, it wouldn't be too difficult. And and like Josh says, that's that collaboration, that human to human moment that sometimes will have to happen. And if we do it right, it's really the system, sending us or, the MLS in Texas, whoever got the member first. It's like, boy, this at least is worth a moment for somebody to say, do you have an Oregon license? Do you have a license somewhere else? Something like that. I mean, that just simple conversation, and maybe just an email.
I thought I might go into scoring a little bit, but I think we have another question first.
I think this is a fantastic idea. It seems to me, though, that if you look at the roadmap going forward, you probably will build on this and have authorization, authentication, identity providers, and build on top of that infrastructure, Open ID Connect, and so on. Is this kind of the first step in that direction, or is this kind of a facility because a lot of organizations don't have the sophistication of the identity providers to facilitate unique claims and so on?
So for the auth part, we actually have that in the back end already. There's an API.
Okay.
We've been testing it, and we'll probably continue to expand that out, the access layer.
Right.
But for now, we have basic auth and tokens. We know who's using it. We don't just open it up to anybody.
Okay. And then the different organizations that have duplicate physical members, you could do federated SSO and so on, and claims and so on. Okay. Thanks.
So I just thought I'd take a second to address Gail's question and just talk about how scoring works a little bit, because it's a little interesting. It's a variable thing. It's something we need to study, actually. And when we get, part of the purpose of the pilot is to actually analyze these fields we've chosen and adjust the weights so that it looks like we're getting the right matches. That's what we're really trying to do. We have about 10%, I think, of the licensee pool right now. Really good section. And then Jay and Olga both have people who they know are duplicates right now. So we can do kind of this A/B test where they can feed us their roster data where they know the duplicates are, and we can tune the parameters so that we can actually match on those. That's kind of the phase we're in right now, is improving the scoring. Scoring works by pretty simple method, kind of similar to a credit score actually. We have primary identifiers, we have secondary identifiers, and no one primary identifier by itself could result in a confirmation. You'd have to have two at least. So here's the primary ones we have right now. This member National Association ID works in the United States or Canada, could be either one. We could do it across borders even. We got the full name, full nickname. So those are the primary. Secondary actually doesn't do much. Secondary is kind of a tiebreaker. If they happen to be there and it's correct and it matches, they might push you over the edge to result in a slightly stronger match. We need to figure out really what these primary and secondary identifiers are. It's going to take some experimentation still. So this was very easy to come up with the programming though, because we don't have to write if-else code. All we have to do is put these in order, as a community. And that makes the programming part super easy. So we can experiment with this. These translate into the 70%. So this 1300 here is the 70% or above. So license plus full name could match, nerds plus license can match, nerds plus full name with nickname can match, and nerds plus full name can match. And then all those other things just improve the score farther. Going to the merge part that Gail mentioned. Let me see if I can get back here. Oopsie. Don't usually use a Mac. Okay, so there's some UI samples here. We've kind of mocked this up to show what that might look like. If we do get a merge, we need kind of this resolution process to support that. So somebody would go in, do that real-time search, matches were found. You can compare each of the records with 70% confidence score or greater. So you go into this comparison screen and figure out, is this the right one? Iterate through them, look for the strongest match. If there's no matches found, we could just create the ULI right away. So, the issue comes up when there's conflicts. So here's a case where you could have an existing licensee, a new match that we found a conflict for, and we might even want to merge in that case because those two records, they do need to be merged. So what happens in that case is we create a tombstone. Like if they choose merge, we'll create a tombstone for the two old ones that point to the new one. If they choose the one on the left, then we'll just leave it on the left. If they choose the one on the right, then we'll create a tombstone from the old one that points to the new one, if that makes sense. So the important thing here is that people are using these licensee identifiers and their transactional data. We can't just delete it. Those things are in records somewhere. So if you have that in your system, we have to be able to point to the new match once it's been updated. So we've kind of accounted for that here.
Josh, can I ask you a quick question that's about UPI as opposed to ULI?
Maybe I might not be able to answer that one. But
okay, well, the question I was wondering about is, can that tombstoning approach be used if two APNs get merged together in UPI? And if so, great. And then the contrary case, which is in San Francisco, sometimes we have APN splitting. So now you have to take one and it splits to two. How do you tombstone one thing that points to two? Or do you just keep one alive and the other one's the new one or whatever?
So you had one record and it split into two? Yeah, so you could point to both from the old record, right? And you could actually even use this weighted probabilistic matching algorithm on the address components to like check your UPIs as well. So this algorithm would work with any data set. I think that's it for the mockups. There'll be a dashboard for people so they can check, And then the goal is to have real-time messaging back and forth so that if we have two people who need a confirmation, they can do that efficiently.
Technology cool sometimes, right? Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
Okay. So again, this is oh, you got a question? All right.
Sure. I'm glad that it's on the screen. The decentralized notion, the decentralized ULI issuance. What is the current state of the pilot program with respect to decentralized architecture? Do we explore that right now?
That's a great question. So what are we working on right now in R&D? The thing that needed the R&D was the matching algorithm. So we're refining that. This is a question that, the answer to this question comes from how much you're willing to share data, how real time you want the search to be. The MLS landscape is already decentralized. It's all the 500, all their different API endpoints. So, but there are ways we can make the decentralized approach work better, like with a ledger, for example. That would make it so everybody could have that data set locally, and it would be like their own local source of truth, but it still is flowing throughout the landscape. So that's another way to support decentralized. There are other options, though. If people don't really want to share, they can run their local environments, and then they could use a registry to help. Like, you know your local data, and when you find a match, you could register that so that you could know which orgs have those people, right? So you might not have the information shared, but you at least know where to go find it if you need to. So that's if people want less information shared. The third option is this centralized solution where somebody just builds a service and stands it up. And really, the decentralized with a ledger looks like that to everybody else. That's something we need to figure out, though.
I say currently, I mean, the pilot's centralized. It just made sense to throw all that data kind of into that bucket and then see, and work it. And like you say, since we're all cooperating with our neighbors to really help refine this, it makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah, this part on the right here is the same in either one. You can actually see this picture is there in each one of them. It's a little micro picture here, and it's also here. So we need to run that somewhere. The pilot is about running this right-hand side. The thing we need to do right now is figure out which the left-hand side is going to be.
Yeah, so this says we have 5 minutes, but the next transport and certification starts at 3. We can get guys right on track, I guess, if we want to wrap up, right? I'm anxious to go. I'm going to keep trying to get us off the stage.
We can
Well,
wrap
I
this
saw
up.
Paul
Thank
coming
you.
and giving me the hairy eyeball. I'm
It's
like,
3.
oh, geez.
John, it's 3.
It's 3. So we meet, John, you're on. We meet
Oh, yeah. Well, all right, hold on.
When's the next ULI meeting, Greg? Do you know? Sachs?
I got it on my calendar. Hold on.
Our next ULI meeting, I believe, is the first Friday of June.
Hold on. for
What
crying
that
out
date is
loud.
off the top of my head, I don't have.
We're not going to do it in May, right? So
No, we're
R&D, well, R&D is the first Thursday in June, and ULI is the first Friday. So we want to talk about ULI Friday at 10 a.m.
Pacific.
Pacific.
Yes. And
So
then
please
R&D
attend.
is 11 a.m. Pacific on the
Yes,
first Thursday
it
of
is,
the
my
month.
friend.
Yes. So thank you all. Appreciate
Yes,
it. And I
thank you.
mean,
Thanks, everybody.
we will move forward, as you know, because with these two folks next to us get to go to work.
And if you'd like to join the pilot, reach out to Sam and I. There's a license agreement to sign first. So sam@reso.org and then josh@reso.org. I'll handle getting your data in there. We can start using it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.